In the 1990s, the internet, at least as we think of it now, was truly beginning. The technological possibilities, the communications possibilities, the artistic possibilities were all being enthusiastically latched onto by a gang of optimists and pioneers who saw the internet as a potential utopia, a place free of identity, a place of pure mind that would disrupt and improve everything. For a time, this was true, as the internet was mostly occupied by those very technologists, utopians and radicals. But that wouldn't and couldn't last. The optimism of this period was unrealistic and somewhat arrogant. It reached its apex, probably, in 1996, when John Perry Barlow penned the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, a document which now seems pitifully naive, a scant 20 years later.
A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, as written by John Perry Barlow at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, on February 8th, 1996. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one, so I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. You have neither solicited nor received ours. We did not invite you. You do not know us, nor do you know our world. Cyberspace does not lie within your borders. Do not think that you can build it as though it were a public works project. You cannot. It is an act of nature, and it grows itself through our collective actions. You have not engaged in our great and gathering conversation, nor did you create the wealth of our marketplaces. You do not know our culture, our ethics, or the unwritten codes that already provide our society more order than could be obtained by any of your external impositions. You claim there are problems among us that you need to solve. You use this claim as an excuse to invade our precincts. Many of these problems don't exist. Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs, we will identify them and address them by our means. We are forming our own social contract. This governance will arise according to the conditions of our world, not yours. Our world is different. Cyberspace consists of transactions, relationships, and thought itself, arrayed like a standing wave in the web of our communications. Ours is a world that is both everywhere and nowhere. But it is not where bodies live. We are creating a world that all may enter without privilege or prejudice accorded by race, economic power, military force, or station of birth. We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere, may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. Your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. They are based on matter. There is no matter here. Our identities have no bodies, so unlike you, we cannot obtain order by physical coercion. We believe that from ethics, enlightened self-interest, and the common weal, our governance will emerge. Our identities may be distributed across many of your jurisdictions. The only law that all of our constituent cultures would generally recognize is the Golden Rule. We hope we will be able to build our particular solutions on that basis. But we cannot accept the solutions you are attempting to impose. In the United States, you have today created a law, the Telecommunications Reform Act, which repudiates your own Constitution and insults the dreams of Jefferson, Washington, Mill, Madison, de Tocqueville, and Brandeis. These dreams must now be born anew in us. You are terrified of your own children, since they are natives in a world where you will always be immigrants. Because you fear them, you entrust your bureaucracies with the parental responsibilities you are too cowardly to confront yourselves. In our world, all the sentiments and expressions of humanity, from the debasing to the angelic, are parts of a seamless whole, the global conversation of bits. We cannot separate the air that chokes from the air upon which wings beat. In China, Germany, France, Russia, Singapore, Italy, and the United States, you are trying to ward off the virus of liberty by erecting guard posts at the frontiers of cyberspace. These may keep out the contagion for a small time, but they will not work in a world that will soon be blanketed with bit-bearing media. Your increasingly obsolete information industries would perpetuate themselves by proposing laws in America and elsewhere that claim to own speech itself throughout the world. These laws would declare ideas to be another industrial product no more noble than pig iron. In our world, whatever the human mind may create can be reproduced and distributed infinitely at no cost. The global conveyance of thought no longer requires your factories to accomplish. These increasingly hostile and colonial measures place us in the same position as those previous lovers of freedom and self-determination who had to reject the authorities of distant, uninformed powers. We must declare our virtual selves immune to your sovereignty, even as we continue to consent to your rule over our bodies. We will spread ourselves across the planet so that no one can arrest our thoughts. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. Davos, Switzerland, February 8th, 1996, and read in New York City, July 30th, 2013.
The Internet has been through several seismic transformations throughout its existence. In its first incarnation, the internet was the antithesis of that utopian vision in its Declaration of Independence. The original form the internet took was that of a military network, a 1960s idea to protect communications in the event of a nuclear war by building in redundancy via a network of networks. If any parts of the network remained after an attack, they would be able to route around the damage, contact each other, and so allow communication and launch codes to still be transmitted. By the 1980s, this original military network was usurped by a scientific network spreading between universities and other scientific installations that would form the backbone of the internet as we know it now. Academics were able to communicate much more freely, share information and papers at great distances. This is where the original culture of the free internet began, in academia. It's easy to forget in this age of safe spaces, no platforming and activism for censorship on university campuses that this was not always the case. Universities since the 1960s had been hotbeds of positive radicalism, free speech, free love and utopian politics. That they would inject the nascent internet with utopian idealism and free speech radicalism was entirely predictable, as was their wish to have access to this wonderland of knowledge once they left the confines of the university and went home to work. Where there's a need, something will arise to meet that need, and so, from the military and educational sphere, the internet entered the commercial arena as companies sprang up to offer access to those who wanted it. That made the internet more widely available. And who adopted it at first? Techies, science fiction fans, those, like the graduates, who were primed for utopian technological visions, the Trekkies, the programmers, and the technicians who believed in the power of science and truth. In 1991, the last piece fell into place. Tim Berners-Lee, working at CERN in Switzerland, had developed a new iteration of hypertext markup language that would become the World Wide Web as we know it. Web pages and links, embedded images, later video, audio, animation, games, and everything else that makes up the web as we know it today. Everything was in place for a massive technological revolution. There was a revolution. The internet disrupted everything. It continues to disrupt everything. In the early days of the internet, it was the Wild West. Laws designed for a world of things were ill-adapted to a world of freely and rapidly shared information. Long before the advent of torrents or file sharing, there was Usenet, with enormous files spread across multiple downloads that could be downloaded over days. People transcribed books by hand without recourse to optical character recognition and shared them on these crude platforms. Books and films that were banned across national boundaries could now be downloaded and spread, whether they were tiny encoded versions of A Clockwork Orange or text files of the Anarchist's Cookbook. What really blew it wide open, though, was pornography. Little has been so regulated in the history of humankind as erotic material. In the time before the internet, any number of regulations, controls and censorship regimens had been put in place. Boards of people sat and watched, ticking boxes, assigning ratings, demanding changes or banning material. The internet put an end to this. There was nothing to stop someone in a country where it was legal from scanning and uploading pornography, and nothing to stop someone in another country where it was illegal. All those regulations, all that effort to confiscate and control came to nothing in the face of the internet, and there was no practical way to trace it, prosecute or stop it spreading. Nobody besides a few moralists were initially very concerned about this, and the pornography producers themselves were early adapters and adopters, helping drive the push to higher speed internet and efficient video encoding, to webcams and online sales systems. Music succumbed next, film to a lesser extent given the sheer scale of the files involved. Books, comics, anything that could be boiled down to information and transmitted down the cable was vulnerable and disrupted. Information wants to be free used to be a catchphrase of the internet. Free turned out to have more than one meaning. Music and films weren't the only things to spread, People met across international lines and fell in love. International marriages grew and grew. Ideas spread along international lines from atheism to democracy and disrupted existing patterns and beliefs to varying degrees. At different times it has seemed that the internet has been an engine for freedom, something that can overcome and surpass all attempts at restriction and censorship. But more changes were coming. The existing system also had the capacity to adapt and shift. The internet in its inception was designed to stand up against and route around nuclear war. It was designed to handle physical damage. John Gilmore drew a comparison between that and censorship, saying that the net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. The internet was vulnerable, however, very vulnerable, to other forms of damage. One of the greatest demonstrations of this occurred in 1988, when the Morris worm wreaked havoc on the nascent internet. Designed innocently to gauge the size of the internet at the time, it replicated itself from computer to computer, sending copies in all directions to ping how many actively participating machines were out there. The problem was that multiple copies could install and run on any machine, slowing them down, eating up bandwidth, and processing time until they all ground to a halt. The cost of removing it may have been as high as $10 million, and this from a single virus when the internet was small and barely commercial. The internet was vulnerable to digital pathogens, but it was also vulnerable to biological pathogens, users. In 2000, one of the most widespread and most damaging viruses was not so much a feat of technical wizardry, but a demonstration that a major problem with the internet, as with any other system, was the human element. I Love You relied on the gullibility and curiosity of the users, and by 2000, the user base of the internet was no longer the technically minded early adopters, the academics, the scientists and the subcultures that had used it before. Now every office had access to the internet, and huge numbers of non-technical people were coming online in unprecedented numbers, without the experience or the skill to navigate the hazards. In total, removing I Love You may have cost as much as $25 billion in damage and fixes. The internet could survive an atomic bomb, it couldn't survive human stupidity. This was a warning of things to come. The ubiquity and popularization of the internet made I Love You possible. It also reflected a change in the population of the internet. The internet was now something for everyone. It was now being commercialized in ways it had been free of before. Money now had its hooks into the internet, and while the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, the damage that this commercialization wrought would remain. The banks and payment services now had control over the things that made the internet work: hosting, commerce, online shopping, and everything else. The next big shock to hit the internet was also the result of its popularization: social media. There were many stops and starts on the road to social media: Friendster, 6 Degrees, and perhaps most famously MySpace. It was with Facebook, however, that social media became truly ubiquitous and provided what the previous attempts at web portals had attempted to provide: a fully commercialized, fully curated, smaller version of the internet. Where previous social networks had failed, Facebook spread like a virus from person to person until it was virtually ubiquitous, to the point where not having a profile on Facebook was seen as peculiar. Many people now only really experience the internet through a handful of sites, even just one: Facebook. This was bad enough, but things were about to get even worse. Facebook wasn't only providing a curated and censored experience, it began to go further. People began to self-select. They would block people who disagreed with them, thumbs up and reshare things that agreed with them. No conspiracy was needed. People fell into their little echo chambers and began to diverge from each other, began to become more extreme in their points of view, because they only ever saw things that agreed with them. The old anonymous internet also began to be burnt away in the cold light of day. Companies wanted to know who you were. They wanted to track your activities so they could sell you things. And Facebook helped to kill the old way of doing things inch by inch. The old way of having handles, hiding who you were unless you chose to reveal yourself. These were now lost. Now the real you was on show all the time, something that used to be anathema. Now having an avatar and a pseudonym is seen as being afraid for some reason. It's seen as a cause for suspicion. Things have entirely reversed. These pressures and tendencies became even worse with the rise of the algorithm, the last of the major quakes to shake the internet to its core. Google took over the internet search market through its superior search algorithm. But over time, seeking to innovate more and more, these search algorithms began to become tailored. Google came to know who you were connected to. It tracked what you searched and what you looked at previously, where you'd been, the people you interacted with. Now it wasn't just your Facebook feed that was being tailored, initially unintentionally, to confirm your biases. It was the leading search engine. An atom bomb couldn't destroy the internet. Our own biases, laziness and confirmation bias, the tendency to believe things that conform to our existing beliefs, that could. Commercial interests, convenience and online lynch mobs hunting down anyone with a dissenting opinion has all but killed that old idealistic dream. It exists still, only in the shadows, preserved by the freaks, geeks, trolls and outcasts, a ghost of its former self. Is there a way back to that utopian internet? And if there is, should we go back? The idealism of the past allowed for or hid some genuine issues. The anonymity of the internet allowed for thoughts and information to be spread, but it also allowed for piracy and trolling. The new internet of open identification has impacted piracy, trolling and bullying, but it has choked free thought. It has weakened the internet as a tool of anonymous sharing, comfort, dissent and safety. It has made our data, who we are and what we do, just another commodity to be bought and sold. Commercial pressure and social shaming has banished the strange and the interesting to the fringes. People, faced with the sheer enormity of information available, retreat to a handful of sites, to the safe, to the familiar. And this is understandable. When you step outside this preordained, pre-packaged, algorithmic world, you still face other issues. That overwhelming torrent of data is hard to pick your way through. The information in it is not ranked by accuracy. Its prevalence is not contingent upon its truth, but its popularity. There are far more websites, blogs and pages telling you that 9/11 was an inside job, or that vaccines cause autism, or that we never went to the moon, than there are refuting it. Why? Because crazy ideas are popular to laugh at as much as anything else. People form into these mutually reinforcing echo chambers where their ideas get bolstered, and because people committed to an idea have far more energy and investment in it than those who seek to debunk them. It's far easier to make or to repeat a spurious claim in terms of time and effort than it is to unpick it and show where it's wrong. The net is vulnerable to memes, viral ideas. It has been infected by corporatism and identity politics the way an organism is infected, and it has subverted the main organs of the internet, the search engines and the social media, the way we communicate with each other, the way we locate and use information. All of these are infected. It has even subverted the internet so much that the sources and remaining camps of the original vision are the ones treated as though they are the infection. To fix the internet, to regain that utopian vision, to genuinely reclaim the internet, it will be necessary to create a new immune system, to inoculate, subvert and bypass these viruses. You can do that by being aware of how things work, You can decouple your searches from your personal information by using alternative search engines or anonymous browsers. You can ad block and then whitelist only sources and sites that have proven that they deserve your support. You can speak up about or vote down bad information and speak up about or upvote good information. You can consider sources. You can use critical thinking. But the problem with all of this is that it takes effort, and for it to have an impact, it needs to have a critical mass of people doing so. So if you really, really want to reclaim the internet, you need to overcome your inertia. And with your effort, and everyone else's effort, we can reclaim that lost world, that digital Atlantis. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe, share on your social media, and if you feel so inclined, you can support me on Patreon at Grimatube. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com, and there, or on Twitter, you can keep up with me and everything that I'm doing.